All right, everybody. I am Kathy Klotz-Guest. I am your host. I'm the founder of Keeping It Human. I'm an improviser and storyteller, and with me today is somebody who's sort of my soul sister in a lot of ways. And not only does she have two Ks, just the alliteration works, Kathy Klotz-Guest and Kat Koppett, but she is the founder of Koppett.com and two Ps, two Ts, Koppett.com. I want to make sure you guys get that right. So you can look it up later. And we are both, improvisers and storytellers. We do a lot of speaking. We work with a lot of leaders and teams on how to use storytelling. And we're both practitioners in the, religion of improv, I would say.
and we have the same hair and glasses, so nobody's going to tell us apart.
We do. Well, no, they will. They'll be just like,
bangs.
Well, yeah, that's true. I have bangs and you don't, and you look lovely. Your hair looks lovely. So, and I think that's part of, what's most important is that.
We also have like pictures and whiteboards behind us. It's a little, and the things, it's a little bit eerie.
It's kind of weird now that you say it. I kind of, if we're not in the same room at the same time, can people actually prove that we're different people?
No, maybe it's just a mirror.
We're definitely mirrors. Well, what's really funny is, Kat's been in the improv community and going to different conferences. I met her at the Applied Improv Network conference, or AIN, which is a really wonderful conference. And we've both spoken at places like AIN and Funny Biz, but never at the same time. So we've never been in the same room doing a speaking thing at the same time. So it's like, I don't know. All right. Well, she's really wonderful, and I'm glad she's here. So, all right. Let's kind of jump in and see where the conversation goes. I sort of started the conversation at the beginning with just maybe we'd sort of talk about storytelling and improv. We'll see where it winds. We'll see what the questions are. For those of you new to Blab, it's very improvisational. It's a really improvisational medium. So don't worry. The conversation kind of ebbs and flows, and we are recording it if you have to drop off. So let's jump on in. And one of the things I'm fascinated by is the sort of this tipping point. I think we've reached a trajectory or a tipping point of leadership and storytelling and improv, where leaders actually are starting to recognize that this is not a soft skill. It's actually a critical leadership skill. And if I read one more article, Kat, that describes storytelling as a soft skill, someone's gonna lose it. It's not a soft skill. So let's start there. Let's talk about that.
Well, the first thought I have as you're saying it, as I was just thinking the other day, it feels like I don't hear the term soft skill as much as I used to. It feels like a kind of 80s, 90s language. I don't know if that's really true or if it's just the conversations I'm having. What do you think about that? Like, just even the distinction between hard and soft skills feels like it's less that in the zeitgeist, the idea that emotional intelligence and relationships and all of those things that are something other than just technical knowledge or content expertise have so clearly been both proven and experienced as important to navigating the world today, that soft and hard don't even have any.
Yeah. It's a really great question. I think leaders more and more, heads of companies, heads of organizations are getting the message. But what's really interesting is that I still see a lot of trainers still breaking out. I see it a lot. Trainers break out hard and soft skills training, and I'm not really sure why. So I think the message is getting to the top of the organization. People are getting it, but I still see that boundary, which this artificial division, which makes very little sense to me, happening at the training level. And I think it's an old habit. I think that just has not died an ugly death yet. And I think that it's getting there. But yeah, I still kind of see a little bit of that. But I think the very smart organizations and the very smart leaders that get it. And there's not that division anymore.
I wonder maybe if it's something more like, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I think one of our jobs as trainers, right? And is to be able to hone or focus when we're training on what is it I'm focusing on right now. Like, when I'm designing this moment of learning, what am I focusing on? So to that end, I suppose there's some value in being able to make distinctions, right? Like, is this knowledge? Is it a skill? So I wonder if maybe a more useful distinction than hard skills and soft skills might be, one of them might be, I'm making this up, like universal skills and specific contextual skills, right? Like like coding might be a specific contextual skill that I need to have in this particular job description to do this particular task. That I might not need to have, to negotiate a contract. But there are other skills that are sort of universally important whenever there are two human beings in the same room together.
No, it's an interesting one because I think, and I don't either. And I don't either have a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of answers that I'm interested about, because I think that becomes, those distinctions become, I think, more meaningless over time. They really are. I mean, a leadership skill is a leadership skill. Go. Okay, I think there we go. Okay, we lost you for a second. Yeah.
Was it me? Because I'm okay. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it looked like basically we lost video and we lost audio for you.
Oh dear.
No worries. Well, let's also talk about, I think, one of the big topics here is how improv can really enrich storytelling. And there's so many ways. I know it's like boiling the ocean, because when I get that question too, I go, well, where do you start? Because it's a big thing. What are you seeing in organizations out there that you're working with? How are people getting the message or really understanding the spirit of how improv can really make their storytelling better, and how are they embracing it? What are they working with?
I think the biggest distinction between thinking about approaching storytelling as an improviser and all of the other ways that all of the other communities that are coming to storytelling is an obvious one, which is that improvisers are making it up in the moment as they go, as opposed to working too hard to script or craft their stories ahead of time. I mean, duh, in some ways it's a tautological answer to the question. Well, we're improvising. So what do I mean when I say that? I think that there are some things that we have in common, right? Which is that we look at learning about narrative structure and universal narrative symbols and what makes a story compelling, whether it's genres or characters or points of conflict or obstacles and overcoming them, or moments of change and transformation, whatever it is that are the elements of good storytelling. The other things that what improvisers do then is say, how do I get really good at receiving what exists in the moment? So sort of doing that in the present, right? So what exists right now that I could use to be inspired, that I can use as the catalyst, right? So if here's the platform, what is existing right now?
Yes.
And then what in this moment might be a catalyst for a change moment. What one of these things might not be just routine, but might be why is today different moment that I could accept and build with. And the other thing, I know I'm going on for a while, so just one more thought there. What the other thing then is that improvisers in some ways do storytelling backwards, which means like the image that I think came out of Paul Sills and Second City was he used to talk about improvising as like telling a story by driving by looking in your rear view mirror. You can't really see the road in front of you. All you can see is where you've been. Yeah. So when you're storytelling as an improviser, what you're really doing is saying, okay, what are all the offers that we've made in the past? And how do I sort of foreshadow in reverse? Like, how do I take all of those things that have already happened and make them important as if I were setting them up to preview what was important at the end. Yeah. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. No, well said. And we're not under any time pressure. So, no worries. I mean, take as much time as you need. And
I thought I'd let you get a word in it.
Not at all. No. I'm fascinated because we're both improvisers. We both work with storytelling, and I'm very interested in hearing what other people see and hear and experience out there. And I think you're right. I think what's really something you said really struck me as being really spot on. And it's interesting because so much of leadership is being present in the moment, but we are taught as organizations, when we're dealing with organizations, to have a plan. You got to have the plan. So you got to have the plan. Everybody needs a plan. Amen to the plan. Let's all worship at the altar of the plan. The plan is very important. And I think the hard part is for companies in today's dynamic environment to be able to trust themselves to let go of the plan and know when to stop the plan and to be improvisational and to tell the story differently. So just because and you see this all the time with the work you do with presentations. And I see it with pitch decks. It's knowing that, all right, you know your story well enough so that when you do get in front of an audience, or maybe it's a virtual audience, or maybe it's a physical audience, doesn't matter. Knowing your story so well that you know when to put the plan aside and say, all right, the story in the moment needs to change. The environment's different. The audience is different. The feeling is different. And trust your gut enough to be able to, in that present moment, adapt the story. And I think some startups are very nimble and they're very improvisational by nature. And then there's bigger organizations that just by the nature of being heavily matrixed and just very big and hierarchical don't do that well.
Right.
And it's really an interesting skill. And it's very hard to get some companies to understand that plans are great. What's even better is knowing when that plan just has to be put aside for the moment. And that's where I think improv and storytelling at a high level, forget the tactical marketing stuff, at a high level, I think needs to go.
Well, and it's a polarity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Because on the one hand, I'm sure you have clients like this too, right? You can have chaos.
Yes.
Right? You can have, we're a startup and we're going to just go and we don't want structure and we don't, and management is bad and let's just do what's needed right now and we're going to make a product and let's not have a plan. And, and we're saying, okay, what is your story? What's your North Star? What's your vision? What are you driving toward? And okay, we're here and we want to get here. Yeah. How do we have some structure to get there? Is really what's needed. And then, as you were saying, you have a whole bunch of other, it's a more traditional problem where you're so connected to, I think there's a real we're old enough to have grown up in with a lot of shame, at least I did, around not having a plan. I mean, my whole life, personally and professionally, has been improvised. And it has taken me a very long time to not feel deep shame about the fact that I sort of secretly didn't have a business plan for a long time. I mean, my business is...
That's interesting. Yeah.
We just celebrated our sort of official 10-year anniversary. Really, it's probably 15 years old as an organization, but officially... Wow. We're 10 years old, and I think it's really only we had sort of a vague business plan maybe 5 or 7 years ago on paper. It's really only the last 2 or 3 years that we've had a CFO and, financial plans and, everything that wasn't kind of on the back of the napkin.
Yeah.
So
yes. No. And that's a really important point. And I'm with you. And I don't see it as a polarity anymore. And I never did. I always thought the two needed to kind of coexist.
Surf it, right?
Yeah, totally. And because I put together a business plan. That's all nice and well and good. But we all know that plans are 4-letter words. A plan is a 4-letter word. It's not gonna. Sometimes it's gonna blow up, and things don't go according to the plan. And if you're not nimble, what do you do then? So I've just always felt that plans are great, but plans are just only half of the whole equation of success. And you're sort of talking to that, and I really love that. We've got a question. I want to address it because we're talking high level.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about Blab is that I always have to. If I look like I'm looking a lot of places, I'm having to watch the text chat window.
Yeah.
So I apologize. I'm listening intently, but I'm also looking.
I love it. I'm with you.
For things.
That's a great question.
Yeah, we've got some great questions. So let's talk about Brenny. Brenny's got a great question. We haven't gotten there yet, but let's talk about it. What are your thoughts about character and role in the story as that might pertain to training? So character and role.
Yeah. I love this question. I just finished writing a blog post this week about thinking about this. My daughter worked with a casting director in the city a couple months ago. She's 12, and she brought in a song, which was a song about a 13-year-old girl from the musical 13, and she brought in a Snoopy monologue, and the casting director gave her great feedback. She had a wonderful time. And her reaction to the song was, "That's awesome. It's a great piece for you." And gave her some notes. And her reaction to the Snoopy monologue was, "You should pick something else. Snoopy's a boy."
Yeah.
And I was like, and when she told me this at dinner later, when Leah told this, my head sort of exploded. I was like, you can't do Snoopy? What do you mean you can't do Snoopy? He's not a boy. He's a dog, and he's like a cartoon dog who is like the symbol of wild imagination and being able to be anything you can be. And you're telling me that like the casting director can't tell if you can act because like okay. So here's how this plays out for me.
And let's suspend the fact that Snoopy actually thinks he's a person and flies a house. Let's forget that.
It's like Snoopy can be a vulture and a World War I fighter pilot.
Exactly.
And but you can't tell if a 12-year-old girl can act because like the part she's playing, like it was mind blowing. So what is important to me about this, and what I think is wonderful about the question and the idea of story and exploring story in the applied sense is, I think both in terms of how we look at and engage with others, and how we think about and engage with ourselves. We do a huge amount of typecasting.
Yes.
And I think that, to be fair to this casting director, she was actually doing them a great service, right? Because her job is to be able to make instant assessments of, is there a match between this thing that I need in this very complicated puzzle piece of putting together this show and that performer right there? Like I have 1,000 puzzle pieces to pick from. Can I slot one in? What's going to be the easiest fit? And as an actor, you need to know, can I make myself an easy fit for that puzzle? So I need to know what I'm coming in with. What will people see me as? What's the good fit? And how do I present that? Right. Yeah. So there's some positive things about, how do people see me? What do I know I'm bringing into the room?
Yes.
How do I show that off?
Yeah.
How do I show up with my strengths and let people see them? Yeah. How do I manage what I know I'm showing up with? If I'm a 40-something little white woman with a master's, like what am I bringing into the room with me, and how do I manage that? So that's all great. And where do I want to stretch that? Where might I want to challenge that? Yeah. Where might I want to give other people an opportunity to show me other things? If I'm looking to hire, might I want to strip away what I think are requirements? So there's a huge amount of how do I expand my range myself? Where do I give other people opportunities to show up and play differently?
Right. No, and I think you just hit on something really interesting because if I understand, Brenny, there's a couple of parts to your question, and I know it's hard sometimes in the text window to get the nuances, but there's the other side of the coin, which you kind of alluded to, which is in training, it's not just the character we bring, it's the character of the people showing up. And everybody, unfortunately, here's what I don't like about the 21st century company is everybody has a title. Everybody has a title. But regardless of what that title is, it doesn't matter if I'm a senior director of marketing or if I am an HR director, whatever that is, people tend to prescribe roles based on that protagonist and that title. And the reality is in a training environment, I think people are looking to be seen and heard beyond that role because everybody has an aspirational mindset. The reason they're doing training is to be better, to be different, to grow. And I think there's that other side of when we are thinking about challenges in training, I think we have to think about roles in terms of challenges, but not roles in terms of titles. And I think too often a lot of training kind of comes at it from a title perspective, and that really is meaningless to me. I think it's really what is the challenge to overcome? And that's where plot, when you're thinking about who's my protagonist, who's my audience, what are their challenges? Forget about their titles and their roles. The role will change. The role will be variable. But what if I understand their challenge correctly, then I can address that as plot, if you will, in the content that I'm providing in the training. And I think that's maybe what I think I understand a little bit of what she's saying.
Well, and as and in actor parlance, right? When I'm playing a role, the Stanislavski question, right? What's my objective?
Yes.
Right? Like, what am I trying to accomplish in this scene? So I love that, like in this role that I'm playing right now, both in terms of at the role of like my role as manager in the company, and also my role in this scene, what does the scene need right now? What's my objective in this moment, in this little scene that we're co-creating?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to look at it. It's a co-created story. It's a co-created story. And I'm not driving the story as a manager. I'm building it with my employees together. So how can I, in the training, think of it as a co-created story ending? Right. And where do I want that ending to go? And how much do I need from that other person? How much can I focus on them and make them look good and and them in that story? I think that's such an important.
So if we're circling then back to storytelling and thinking of story in organization and my role and character in the story, if there's that model of hero, villain, victim model. This model. And so one of the things that a lot of us tend to do when we're in an interaction is cast ourselves, tell a story about what's happening in this interaction and cast ourselves in one of those roles as hero, villain, or victim. And if I'm feeling like the villain, I might be, really ashamed or guilty or feel terrible. Or if I'm the victim, I might feel helpless or powerless. If I'm a hero, I might feel completely righteous. And I'm like, I'm the good guy. And although at first glance, it might seem like, well, hero is great. It's great to cast yourself as the hero of the show. Not any of one of those is especially healthy, right? That's a trap.
Yes.
That triangle.
Yes.
Right? And so to be able to, one of the things that exercising your improv muscles and sort of expanding your storytelling skills is to, first of all, to be, I think, aware that whatever story you're telling yourself is only one possible story.
That's it.
And there are probably 12 different stories. And what is this person over here? What story are they telling? What's this person over here telling? And also, how might I stretch my range? What if I weren't the hero of this story? What if I were just a person in this story? Or what if I'm not the villain? What if I'm a hero? Or what if I'm not the victim? What if I'm actually the, wise sage counselor? And, what can I, how does reframing I'm using what I'm just sort of riffing on Brenny's words. I don't know what she meant by her question, but what if my I reframe my role or my character? What does that open up for me in terms of how I show up?
Precisely. And I think there's many more roles. There's many, many, many roles. And I think there's the enabler role, and maybe it's sort of part sage where you're the enabler in somebody else's story. They're the hero. You are the person who showed up at the right time to help them realize their wisdom. So maybe it's not about you. Maybe you're sort of a supporting cast role to somebody else's Academy Award, right? So somebody else, you know, and sometimes I think in a training situation, we always have to remember that everybody has their own aspirations and they want to be the hero in their story. So our job as trainer too is how do we enable them to be a hero to their organization, to be of service to their organization? Is there some support role? So I always see training as, it's not about me. It's about that supporting role. I might get a supporting nod if I'm lucky, but I want somebody else to get that Oscar. I want somebody else to be that. And so sometimes you're just the Robin to somebody else's Batman. You don't have to be the Batman. And I think that's kind of the way that, you know, I think about it. Another question. Thank you, Brenny. That was a great question. Oh, good. That's exactly what she meant. She says, thanks. She says, thanks, women. Thank you. Woohoo! All right. Another question from the Improv Company. It's a great question. We're familiar with Ken Adams' Story Spine, and Kat and I are big fans. Worship at the Ken Adams, you know, theater, and we're both very intimately familiar with that model as well. So they use it extensively in our training. But are there other models or resources that are useful when it comes to improv plus storytelling training? Is the question.
Yeah. Yes.
The short answer is yes. Okay, we're done, everybody. Next question.
Yes. And you're probably familiar with many of them. One of them, in terms of resources, is, which you may already know, but for anybody else who's listening, is Ken has a whole book called How to Improvise a Full-Length Play. And it is not directed at the applied audience at all. It's directed at improvisers, but it is chock full of many activities that he has built to help get better at all aspects of creating and co-creating stories. So creating character, creating detail, getting better at conflict, you know, anything that you can think of that would go into creating a full-length play individually and collectively. And it's just an awesome book. So anytime, for anybody who wants to apply improv, there are great activities in there to steal. Anybody who's interested in narrative structure, they're great ideas to steal, and that's a great resource. In addition to that, in a more specific sort of tactical way in terms of activities I use with organizations around storytelling, one that I pair very often with the Story Spine, and I'm guessing the Improv Company probably uses this a lot too, but for our larger audience, is color advance, which is about distinguishing between the advancing plot of a story, which is what comes next, and adding detail and description. And it's great for, you know, it really is just one person tells the story and the other person coaches them on whatever they, you know, at whatever point in the story. If I say, so I was walking down the street, you can say, color the street. And then they give lots of detail about the street. Or I was feeling really sad, color feeling sad. They can describe the inner thought. So it doesn't literally have to be description.
Yes.
And what I love, there are a couple of things I love about it. One is it helps people really distinguish between when am I moving the action forward and when am I deepening or going deeper or extending an explanation of a certain moment or a certain point. Yeah. And that is something that a lot of us have trouble with. So, you know, the example of the sort of archetypical character of the kind of ditzy old aunt who can't quite tell a coherent story, you know, and just sort of starts in the middle and then kind of drifts off. Yeah. Part of that is about getting stuck in color, right? Or if you have someone who tells a story and you're like, wait, I don't understand, because they kind of just skip to the end. So one is being able to distinguish, am I advancing the story or am I describing a moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing I like about it. The second thing I like about it is when you are talking about shifting your story for a different audience, telling the same story for a different audience and being able to make it different for that different audience. Mm-hmm. What the story spine can help you do is be really clear about the spine,
yes,
the key core message of your story. And once you have that, you should be able to tell it in a 30-second version,
yes,
or an hour version. Yeah. And it pretty much stays the same, right? Like any spine in any one of us looks the same.
Yes.
Right? You take any human being and you strip us off, we're all the same. So that is constant. The color part, the color, like where I color is the part that shifts. And so when I start to know what the color is, what I can start to do is say, okay, now, if I have 5 minutes to tell my story, here's the color that's most important versus if I have 60 minutes. Or if I'm telling the story to the CEO, here's the kind of color that he's going to be interested in.
Yeah.
Versus if I'm telling it to the CTO, versus if I'm telling it to the HR director, versus if I'm telling it to a manager in my training program. Right. So that's a very long, really colored explanation of why I like color advance.
Well, you did preface it with color in advance, so we will take that literally. That's a great question. Thank you, the Improv Company, and I agree. I don't call it color in advance, but I love that you do, and I think that's a great apt description for it. I think it's really what you said. I take the middle, the heart of that story spine. My favorite part of that story spine is because of that, because of that, because of that. And I will go into 4, 5, 6, 7 layers deep with people, because what it forces them to do is understand narrative structure and also get to the heart of the issue. Because a lot of times we'll say, well, because I bought this product, I made money or saved money. And that's a very shallow story because it's never about the economic benefit. It's about the bigger human issue. And when I force people to go peel back that onion, and I may get clients do 7 or 8, and they're like, are we there yet? And I'm like, you're not there yet. But the beauty about it is that when you finally strip it back to that thing that is so fundamental about that story, what is the big aha of that story? Then you know you have it. And so that, to me, that because of this and because of that can be some of the richest parts of that story spine model. And that's where I think a lot of people sort of maybe kind of skip over a little bit. And I force people to kind of, I'm a hard taskmaster on that, but I force people to go through it for a really good reason. I think that's really, really super important because it does provide such richness. And I think to your point, the story spine is just a spine. And once you have that basic story, understand that that story has to vary in color and depth and length to your, as you're saying, to different audiences. Just so I always try to remind people that it's just a spine. A spine is very, very important. But if all you do is follow the story spine, you might be missing some important emotional details. So go back and see how you can really flesh it out till you have an emotional core. And I think that's really when you know, at least that's, in some of the things that I see. But
no, I'm glad you said that. There's a great article out there somewhere that Ken has written. There were some blog posts written about like, where did it come from? And, it was out there. Pixar had gotten out there in some Pixar tips, I think because Rebecca Stockley had sort of circled it back around to Pixar. And then Ken wrote a blog in response to someone who had written a blog about something, sort of discovering the story spine. And one of the things that he wrote in his blog about the story spine, which is great. If we can find it, maybe we can link it to something at some point. I'll look for it. Is exactly what you're saying, to really remember that the story spine is not the story. And you could do, I think what he does is the Wizard of Oz in his example. And there are major characters in the Wizard of Oz who don't show up when you story spine it. Right? Whole characters that don't show up, which doesn't mean they're not really rich, delicious, important parts of the story. They're just not part of that core narrative, right? If you're going to tell it in 3 minutes, you could leave it out. So, so I think that that's a really important thing. I feel like I also want to say, just to add a little more color to the Improv Company's question, there are hundreds more improv activities around story, right? You know, so we're not doing justice to answering that question. Some other favorites of mine are, to Brenny's point, there's stuff that you can do around how you perform story. Yeah. There's stuff you can do around how you make story personal, around how you tap into and discover and harvest story from your own life that I do with people. There's stuff around performing story and how do you flex your range around storytelling. Stuff around story sharing. I do a lot of story circle and finding meaning from sharing story. There's also stuff around playing, you know, again, story crafting, like and making it interesting. Like, how do you play with story structure in terms of messing around with the timing of the telling? Like, where do you start? Even if you have your story spine, once you have your story spine, it doesn't mean you have to tell the story in that order. Where do you want to start? How do you make it, you know, how do you raise suspense? So there's a lot of...
There's tons of activity. Absolutely. Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt.
So maybe to summarize that, there's some stuff about generating and harvesting story. There's stuff around story crafting. There's stuff around expanding your storytelling range and performance aspects around story. And then there's stuff around sort of applying storytelling tools to other activities, like using story for visioning, using story for problem solving, so that the point isn't building storytelling skills, but using story as tools for like
for other things,
solving problems or generating ideas.
And I was just going to segue. I'm so with you. I was thinking that storytelling is not just storytelling. Storytelling is how we set up, the way we frame a problem determines how we solve it. And how we ask, what is this?
Say that again, Kathy. That's awesome.
Yes. It's like how we frame a problem determines how we solve it. So what is the story we tell ourselves about what the challenge is or what the problem is? And as you were talking and so well, I was like totally with you. I was vibing you because it's so true. Storytelling is a way to solve other issues. I've seen it used for solving product problems. I've seen it used for solving what are the internal challenges of any organization, engineering, whatever. Because that story that we tell ourselves about what the challenge in front of us will drive how we approach solving it. So I think storytelling is so rich, not just in the traditional way that we've always talked about telling stories verbally or in writing, but a method of framing challenges and solving problems, and how we organize ourselves internally and within companies, and how we get everybody to change directions when we need to lead. And it's all these other things. So I think it's very robust as a problem-solving device.
Oh yeah.
If done in the right way. So that's what I love about it. And I think as improvisers, I know, I know Kat probably agrees with this. There's so many. It's just my head's been thinking of all the applications because there's so many. Well,
what's lovely about it, and what comes to mind when you talk about it as a problem-solving device, is so much of the way we communicate with each other and try to solve problems is about like a knife, right? Like here's the right answer, like going right for the right or wrong or the one answer. And storytelling is so not that. It's so, in my head, it's like it's round as opposed to sharp. And so when you share a story, when you either go in to explore or create a story, or you share through story, it's nuance, right? It's gray, it's spherical, and that. I don't know what the end of that sentence is, but everything that's good about nuance and gray and spherical, which I'm sure obviously there's a huge part of our world and our population that is anti-nuance and spherical and gray. But for those of us who like nuance and spherical and gray,
Well, and you said it so well. No, I think you said it so well. I mean, I don't think you even need to finish that sentence. It's because it's a fully contained, wonderful sentence, and it's so true because it strikes me what you're saying is, I think so much of, especially, I sit in the heart of Silicon Valley, and it's such an engineering mecca and an epicenter, and I think it's a beautiful thing. I think the hard part, and I think it's maturing, it's changing, but when engineers run companies, they look at it as, the hammer and the nail. This is the problem, and there's only one solution, which is the hammer. Or that there aren't shades of gray because code is binary. There's a right or wrong. There's 1 or 0. And that limits the range of possibilities that a company can explore. And what's so beautiful about story thinking is that story thinking allows us to go, oh, well, maybe, there are shades of gray, and there's multiple solutions depending on how we define the issue. Right. And that's why defining the challenge in any story is so important. It's like, what is it, the story that we're telling ourselves about the challenge? What is, in fact, the challenge that we should be solving? And there's probably 10, but what is the one that's the big one? And do we have the right one? And are we framing it the same way? Right. So I think story thinking is such an important skill that goes beyond communication. And I think we've always looked at it as a communication skill, but it's really a problem solving and really sort of more, it's so much more agile and robust than I think we give it credit for. And I love when I see engineering minds, really brilliant engineering minds, and CTOs and VPs of engineering go, oh, I get it. Oh my God, I get it. I get it.
Well, because in fact, they're engineers are some of the best, problem solvers among us. They understand puzzles and different ways of, going around and solve that. There's not one right answer, as well as any of us. There's something in there, as you were talking about, finding, recognizing that even if you are efficiently looking for just a right answer, that the question is, what is the right answer for me in this moment, right? For this problem right now. And that might be different. And I think maybe what I was searching for is there's something about story that allows the receiver to find that, right? To search for and find what's meaningful for me right now in this moment. Again, for me, as opposed to the teller saying, here's what you should do.
Yeah. That's such a great way to put it. And that's such a great, welcome Titch. Thank you for joining us. No, that's such a great way to, and that's what I love about co-created stories. We just scratched the surface on co-created stories. This has been a really great conversation. And I want to, the power of being able to co-create a story where you're inviting people to help you define the story and define the challenge and then define the ending. Because I think that kind of open-ended problem solving invites people to be part of it. And people may not frame it the same way, and they probably won't, which is so beautiful about having a team explore story to tell themselves, what is the challenge we're really facing here? And that's what's so beautiful about co-creating a story with an audience, or co-creating with your customers or whatever it is, because it's going to be so much better. And this is where improvisers get, improv-gasms, because we recognize that so much of it is that, are we on the same page? Hey, are you feeling this way? Does this make sense? And that just makes everything, the problem solving, so much richer and better, I think, I know. I have to work an improv-gasm at least once into every blab. Right. So word of the day. Use it in a sentence. It's a noun. Nice. Yeah. But thanks for joining us, everybody. Any more questions? We're totally open. I mean, we could go, I know Kat and I could probably go on and on and on, and we just want to make sure that we're answering your questions. And if anybody has any more questions.
While they're thinking, and feel free to interrupt me if anyone has a question. You're just talking about improv-gasms and delighting your partner and sort of shared meeting. We have an all-women improv group that we've been working with, and
oh wow.
We had a rehearsal the other day where we were working on exactly this, on sort of testing the boundaries of how do we delight each other, and sort of finding out what delights us and what delights our partners, and really making a distinction between what's good improv, or the right the right choice, and what's going to delight my partner, because something that delights you might not at all delight someone else, and vice versa.
Right.
And we did I was doing a scene with a friend, a partner, in which she was a surgeon, and at the beginning of the scene, she'd washed her hands, right? She did the whole washing her hands, and she was holding her hands in the scene like this for 3-4 minutes of the scene. And I had come in as a nurse with a cold. And so the obstacle in the scene was I was like, oh no, it's fine. I took this new stuff. The other doctor gave me the stuff and he said I'm sterile, even though I was hacking all over something. It was kind of, a stupid little silly scene. But so that was sort of going on. And at some point,
oh no, Kat, you froze. We lost you. We lost you. Oh no. And she was telling a great story too. We lost her. Kat, you froze. So if we can, let's see if we can get you back. Let's see if we can get you back here. All right. Can you call back in, Kat? I'm sorry, we lost, your screen froze right at the middle of telling this really, really great story. Oh no. Kat, call back. While she's calling back, anybody, just final round for questions. If you have questions, there have been some amazing questions. Thank you, everybody, for those questions. We'll do more of these because I think there's so much more richness to explore at the intersection of improv and storytelling. And those of you who do this as well know that to be true. There's so many ways to apply improv to storytelling, whether it's at the sort of presentation level, it's at the marketing level, it's at the internal communications level, it's at the engineering and problem solving level. So many ways to apply it. So we will be having a lot more discussions, richer discussions. Kat, we'll see if you can call back. We'll wait another minute. I'm guessing she's calling from Wi-Fi, and not from a LAN, which probably is she's got variable access, unfortunately. All right, well, we'll give it a minute, but any final questions? We'll go ahead and give you guys a minute to go ahead, and we'll wait a second here. All right, well, looks like we don't have any more questions, and I'm afraid we've lost Kat, and she was right in the middle of telling a great story. So we're gonna have to get the ending of that story. We're gonna have to do another one of these to get the ending of that story. Thanks, everybody. Again, I'm Kathy Klotz-Guest of keepingithuman.com, and our guest was Kat Koppett of Koppett.com. She and I are both improvisers, storytellers at the intersection of that. I know, at the improv company, right? I wanted to hear that story. She came in as a nurse with a cold, and I'm gonna be dying to figure out what the ending of that story is. So I'm just kind of at a loss. We'll do another one of these. We'll have Kat back, and we'll get the ending of that story. I promise you. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Have a fabulous Friday. Have a great weekend. Take care, everybody. And we'll post this online and send it out on Twitter in the next couple of days. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.